These forums are designed to ensure that New Hampshire's voters excuse me, are aware of the Republican Party's dangerous and unconscionable attacks on our democratic form of government. Before we begin tonight's presentation, it's important that you understand why the chat function that you're probably accustomed to seeing is missing. We found that the frequent appearance of pop-up screens distracts the audience from what the panelists are saying. So instead of the chat button, you'll see in its place a Q&A feature, which allows you to pose questions to the panelists, and we will we'll attempt to field as many questions as available, time permitting. As with all Democratic Committee forums, tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be available on YouTube shortly after the event. You may find the link at our website, which is hillsboroughdems.org. Tonight, we are privileged to have as our host, Representative Kat McGhee of Hollis. Before her election to the New Hampshire House, Kat worked in organizational development, technical training in IT, and as a software program manager for a global e-learning company. Kat is past chair of the Hollis Democrats, was an activist with New Hampshire Pipeline Awareness, and has been the recipient of the prestigious Hillsborough County Democratic Committee Grassroots Award. Kat is currently in her second term in the House, where she serves as a deputy ranking member of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, and is the communications director of the Democratic Victory Campaign Committee. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Representative Kat McGhee.
Oh, thank you so much, Roger. What a lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank you all so much for being here with us this evening. I've gotten to watch some of the other Hillsborough County events in this series, and I was honored really to be asked to host this one. I like the title, The Elephant in the Womb, and also just acknowledging the Republican attacks on reproductive freedom, which is something that we all need to be aware of. And I'm happy to hear that it's going to be on YouTube, so that for any of your friends or family or other interested people that are not able to be with us this evening, you can always point them to it after the fact and have them take a watch. So we're very fortunate this evening to have some great guests here to speak with you on various positions on what's happening on the attack on reproductive freedom. Congresswoman Annie Kuster and Executive Councilor Warmington both spoke at a reproductive freedom event just a couple of weeks ago. And as many of you know, Congresswoman Kuster has been, an outspoken leader on behalf of women and reproductive freedom throughout her career. And she was planning to be with us this evening, but ended up unable to be with us this evening. So we have a short video that we would like to share with you. I am told that it has a few little glitches in it, so bear with us. But we're going to cue it up right now so that you can listen to Congresswoman Kuster's message.
Oh, I wish I could be with you for all of this informative conversation on reproductive rights. But please know I am with you in spirit as we continue to advocate for women's reproductive freedom all across our state. First off, I want to extend a big thank you to Chairman Roger Lessard and to Bev Cotton for putting this meeting together. And a very big thank you to Executive Councilor Cinde Warmington and Senator Tom Sherman for always standing up for our democratic values. We are so grateful for your leadership in Congress. And finally, thank you to everyone here tonight for your continued investment in advocating for women's reproductive health and freedom. We're so glad to have you with us in this fight. Your efforts are more important than ever before. All across this country, including right here in the Granite State, we're seeing an outright assault on a woman's constitutionally affirmed right to safe, legal abortion. There's no question Chris Sununu is not a pro-choice governor. He signed an abortion ban with no exception for rape or incest, He signed legislation to send doctors to jail and mandate invasive internal ultrasounds for women. And the Republicans on his executive council even voted down contracts for family planning providers like Planned Parenthood. Every day, Governor Sununu is revealing just how backward his values really are. And that's why earlier this year, we came together across the state to stand against Governor Sununu and his far-right extremists in the legislature and the executive council. Their agenda of controlling our bodies and our decisions has no place in New Hampshire and no place in the United States of America. Now, we must fight to ensure that Roe v. Wade, after 50 years, remains the law of the land, and that women everywhere have access to quality reproductive health care, including abortion. And that's why I'm so proud to have recently led my colleagues in the U.S. House of Representatives in passing the codification of Roe, the Women's Health Protection Act. This bill will codify a woman's right to access safe, legal abortions and protect the healthcare professionals that provide critical family planning resources and reproductive care. We must protect the right for women to make their own healthcare decisions so that women can succeed in their careers, plan for their families, and lead lives of their choosing. I am committed to standing with all of you, fighting for women here in the Granite State and all across this country. We will not let them turn back the clock on the rights of women. We will not let them dictate our healthcare and control our bodies and our most personal and private decisions. We will not sit idly by and let Republican extremists take our rights away. So let's get to work.
Well, that was great. I'm sorry for the audio. You know, it was a little bit catching there and behind and low at the beginning, but I think her message was very clear. So we want to thank Congresswoman Kuster for providing a video for the event this evening. And now we're going to move on to, we're very, very fortunate to have with us Councilor Warmington. Cinde Warmington is our sole Democratic representative from Executive Council District 2. And she's an attorney, and she has practiced in health-related business and regulatory issues for many years, serving as a partner at Shaheen and Gordon, chair of the Health Practice Group until she was elected to the New Hampshire Executive Council in 2020. And she continues to serve as counsel at the firm. Prior to becoming an attorney, Cinde worked in healthcare for 2 decades, including as a medical technologist in hospital laboratories and in various healthcare management roles. As a lifelong healthcare advocate, Councilor Warmington has also dedicated much time as a volunteer to several nonprofit organizations, including on the boards of the New Hampshire Professional Health Program, Riverbend Community Mental Health, and the Lakes Region Mental Health Center, where she served as chair. She's a recipient of the Lakes Region Mental Health Center's Pete Harris Community Service Award for her advocacy work to raise awareness on mental health issues. And I'd like to add that I'm sure I speak for many of us here when I say that we are very proud of the job that you're doing as our lone Democratic executive counselor. So a warm welcome for Councilor Cinde Warmington.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I just want to give a shout out to Congresswoman Kuster, who every day is fighting to protect reproductive rights in Washington. And it is it's critically important that we codify Roe right now, given where Roe v. Wade stands with the United States Supreme Court. It really looks to be threatened. I also want to say good evening to my colleague, Tom Sherman, who has been a stalwart in the Senate on reproductive rights. So you have quite a panel here. And I'm happy to join you and talk about what's been going on with reproductive rights on the Executive Council. So the first the first interface the Executive Council had on reproductive rights this term. I was sworn in on January 7th. And at the first meeting after that, the governor nominated Gordon MacDonald to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So that was a nomination that had failed under the prior democratically controlled council, and he brought that nomination forward. And Gordon MacDonald has been a lifelong activist, anti-choice activist. And more than that, he seemed to, and I won't go into details about this, but have a lot of trouble separating his politics from his position when he was in the Attorney General's office. And that kind of inability to separate your politics from your position is not somebody we need on the court. But we have him, and he joins other very conservative justices. I do not believe we have had in recent times such a really dramatically right-leaning Supreme Court. So that was the first issue. Of course, my vote was the only vote in opposition to the MacDonald nomination, and he was confirmed. So then we saw in the legislative session some legislation that I know Senator Sherman's going to talk more about. But right after the legislation was enacted, it came to the questions came to the Executive Council, because the three biggest pieces that I've been dealing with on the Executive Council are the 24-week abortion ban, the mandatory ultrasounds, and the required financial reviews. And it started with the financial reviews. So there's under the new law, the providers of family planning services have to undergo a financial review to confirm that they are not using any of the state funds to provide abortion services. I'm just going to let my dog out of the room. Excuse me. Just get it. He finds his way in here and then he can't get out. So, I lost my place. So the financial review is under the law is to be done at the end of the contract term. But Councilor Wheeler, in particular, a longtime anti-abortion activist on the Executive Council, demanded that the review be done in advance of the contracting. The Department of Health and Human Services did not agree that the review needed to be done in advance, but acquiesced to conduct a financial review, a sort of what they called a mini review. And so this took many weeks from the contracts were due were up on June 30th, and then didn't get to us until the middle of September. So all of the family planning service providers in our state were not receiving funding during that time so that they could undergo this financial review. And I have spoken with those providers who said that cooperating in that process was a huge undertaking with their staff, more than one person being dedicated full-time for multiple weeks to gather all the information needed to respond to all of the department's inquiries. And of course, it required a lot of time on the part of our Department of Health and Human Services as well. And at the end of all of this, Councilor Wheeler wasn't going to vote for family planning providers, no matter what. The reviews showed that no state funds are being used for family planning services are being used to provide abortion care. And it was very clear that was the department's conclusion, and it didn't change their votes. So I don't know what the purpose, other than just delaying, was of asking for the review if it wasn't going to change your thinking and your voting. So what happened at the council meeting was that the council voted to fund the family planning programs that did not provide abortion services, and not to fund the 3 providers who provide abortion services, even though they demonstrated that the 2 services were separated. But the problem here is, the problem here is that they're not funding, and these providers are not getting funding, and that they provide 75 to 80% of all of the family planning services in our state. So that includes Planned Parenthood, Equality Health Center, and the Joan Lovering Center. And so those 3 centers are not only our only abortion providers, but they are providing the vast majority of family planning services across the state. And I made it very clear and made a very good record by asking the Commissioner of Health and Human Services questions about what these services that they're not funding really are. And we're talking about breast exams, we're talking about pap smears, we're talking about contraception, testing and diagnosis and treatment of sexually transmitted diseases. All of these are services that are not being provided, and they're not being provided to the low income people of our state and people that have difficulty accessing care because there may be low income and in rural areas. So combined, this is a real impact on the people of our state that these services have not been funded. They remain not funded. I have demanded that these contracts be brought back to the council at every meeting, but of course, Sununu isn't interested in that. Sununu is not a pro-choice governor, as he likes to call himself. He is a very anti-abortion activist, as proven by his own vote when he was an executive counselor to defund Planned Parenthood, by his veto of the Reproductive Parity Act, by his nomination of Gordon MacDonald, and of course by signing this abhorrent 24-week abortion ban. So the next thing, the way it works on the council is we get contracts, we get an agenda for the meeting that's coming up the following week, and we review the agenda, and the commissioners who have contracts on the agenda are the commissioners that are going to come before the council to answer questions. So we don't get to call just any commissioner, we get the ones that have contracts that week, which means we always have the Department of Health and Human Services. We may not always have the Medicaid director there. We may not always have the Commissioner of Insurance there. But on the first meeting after the new law went into effect, we had everybody there. And so I took that opportunity to start asking questions. And I asked them to start out, and the Medicaid director, say, who is going to pay for these medically unnecessary ultrasounds? So for everyone who, I'm going to let Tom talk a little bit more about this, but there's a requirement that in order to provide abortion care, you must determine gestational age. And this means performing ultrasounds at very early stages of pregnancy, even when that's not medically indicated. And I wanted to know who was going to be paying for that. We still have not received an answer for that. And the answer for that cannot be yes, because Medicaid does not pay for medically unnecessary services. And the Commissioner of Insurance, I asked, who's going to pay for these medically unnecessary ultrasounds? Are you going to require that the private insurance companies in our state cover the cost of these services? And yes, the answer to that was a yes, but and they even put out a statement saying that the ultrasounds are part of maternity care. But they don't directly answer the question that medically unnecessary ultrasounds will be paid for. This, of course, it's not only designed to just simply humiliate women, but also to increase the cost of obtaining abortion care. And then I asked questions of the commissioner, and she made a very good record that by defunding Planned Parenthood and the other providers in our state, the council was increasing the incidence of unintended pregnancy, also teen pregnancy, and would result in negative birth outcomes. Because the reality is, healthy mothers make healthy babies. And if we don't have good services for women across our state and good reproductive health system, then we are compromising the care of women all across our state. So we asked a number of questions about that at the council meeting, and I continue at every opportunity to raise these issues and to talk about abortion care and family planning services in our state. And at the last, not this past meeting, but the one before, I went through a discussion with the Department of Health and Human Services, the commissioner, and explained that right now, many people may not know this, but New Hampshire actually performs very well in our country with respect to maternal fetal care and birth outcomes. The United States in general does not rank very well as compared to the rest of the world, but within the United States, New Hampshire rates very highly, and it actually is one of only 4 states to be ranked to be graded a B+, and no state is even higher, is higher than that. And so we have managed to provide good maternal fetal health care for our state. And doctors from Dartmouth have indicated that this is our system is jeopardized by the 24-week abortion ban. And in particular, the maternal fetal specialists who provide these services to these very high-risk pregnancies, who would be in the position to needing to make determinations about an abortion post 24 weeks, would be criminalized. Their behavior could be criminal. And though, as they indicate, doctors simply won't come here. There are other states they can go and practice in where they won't be threatened with criminal act, that their practice equates to criminal activity, and won't come here. And then went on to explain that if they don't come here, then the obstetricians also won't come here. And we have so many obstetricians in providing services in rural communities who are relying on being able to refer those high-risk pregnancies to those specialists. We only have 4.5 FTEs of these specialists in our state. And if they don't come here, the obstetricians won't feel safe practicing in our rural communities either. So the entire system is, in jeopardy because of this 24-week abortion ban, which, just to be clear, abortions don't happen at 24 weeks except for extraordinary reasons. And this law has no exception for even a fetal anomaly. It is an abhorrent law. So there's a lot of work on the Executive Council to do around this issue. I continue to raise it. We are going to be seeing new contracts for Planned Parenthood coming forward. The ones that were rejected were terminating on December 31st. And so the contracts are out for the new year starting in January 1. There will be access to some federal funding likely for Planned Parenthood because the Biden administration has lifted the Trump era gag rule. And so there will be funds available directly to Planned Parenthood that will not have to go through the Executive Council, won't go through the state. So we're hopeful that those funds will be available in the spring. But that still leaves a gap here. We had a meeting at the Equality Health Center, and the executive director there, Dalia Radunas, advised us that their sliding scale was going to have to go up in January, and there'll be people who cannot afford to come for their routine family planning services, and because of the increase in rates. But there's really nothing they can do about that because they've been defunded. And I just want to say thank you to Leah for the work that you are doing to make sure that we have some funding there for those women who need services and are unable to pay for that. So that's a lot of talking by me, but I'm happy to answer questions.
I was just gonna open it up and invite people to put questions in the Q&A box. And while they're doing that, I would just like to say what I was thinking while you were speaking. When you give a fulsome picture, which is not what we ever really get when Republicans talk about an issue, you see the wide scale impacts of this kind of a decision, right? This idea of taking us back 50 years. I was walking with a friend of mine today and she said, you should mention that story about your mother. My mom died in 2018 and she was almost 96 at the time. And she had lived through a lot. She was British and she was in London during World War II. And when Roe v. Wade happened, that was the only time my mom ever said anything political to me, because she really was not a political person. And she said, this is the most important decision for women in my lifetime. And when I heard you talking about, the specifics of the organizations impacted and the outcomes impacted, it's such an abdication of responsibility on the part of these folks to make an ideological decision that has this kind of impacts, especially the impacts on the healthcare system, which I'm sure maybe Dr. Sherman will talk about as well. But I talk to folks about this issue and other issues in terms of a race to the bottom. The way that these guys are governing, they're really gonna be collapsing the capabilities that we've built up over time in so many different areas. And our healthcare system is one where we could not be attacking it right now, but and also Leah will be speaking about that as well. But let's see. Oh, we have a question. So let me get that to you.
I mean, I just want to add there that when I really elicited from the Department of Health and Human Services what kind of services women will not have access to, including cancer screenings, meaning that their cancers are diagnosed later and are less treatable, less curable, and more expensive to treat, that had no impact on the other counselors. I mean, they simply do not care about the implications and the ramifications for women of this law and of their defunding of Planned Parenthood. And as I say to everybody, we care, and we need to make sure they understand how much we care.
So we have a question from Stephanie Sposato, and her question is simple. What can we do about this? And then we have another question after that too.
Speak out and call your executive counselors, make sure that we organize around this issue. I can tell you, I did some help at the Bedford election, the Bedford special election, and also the special election at Cheshire 9. And this issue is really, really resonating with voters. New Hampshire is one of the most pro-choice states in the union, and this is clearly not New Hampshire. And I think that Republicans are recognizing that they've touched a dangerous nerve here, but we need to make sure, and we need to vote them out of office. And this is what it's going to be all about. But I have to tell you, the specialists from Dartmouth are warning that it may not be soon enough. Next November isn't soon enough, because the impacts on our healthcare system are going to happen the moment this law goes into effect in January.
So there's another question here by Althea Ansa, and it says, in New Hampshire, there are at least 16 pregnancy resource centers and 60 plus federally qualified health centers and 60 plus STD testing clinics that provide healthcare and family planning services to women. They also provide breast exams, cancer screenings, pap smears, free pregnancy tests, and other services. How do Democrats plan to support these facilities in the future, even though they do not provide abortions?
Well, the family planning funds, the Department of Health and Human Services puts out a contract, an RFP for family planning services, and those who qualify respond and wish to provide these services respond to the RFP, that's the contracts that come before the council. So that's the process for getting funded. Apply. They can apply for services. There are plenty of services that are provided by Planned Parenthood that aren't provided by other providers. For instance, it is not easy to walk into your primary care office or a federally qualified health center and have an IUD placed. It's not possible generally to get a shot for birth control. There are other services. Also, family planning services are specifically trained to provide counseling and around reproductive health that other providers are not. And the reality is this is where women are getting their services in our state.
Thank you. That's great. Your knowledge, it's so wonderful that you have so many answers for people. So I've got another one. I've got two questions here, actually, one and then a follow on from Teresa Anderson. She says, I felt blindsided by this change in my home state. I'm sure I'm not alone. Do you have any ideas as to how this kind of thing could have passed during a time when Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House? So not in the state, but federally. I would have risen, but I was completely unaware that this was happening in New Hampshire. Also, can you help provide or direct us to socioeconomic population stats that we could use to show them exactly how many citizens they are affecting with this law? I'm sure there are a lot, as I used to be one of them.
Okay, so I do want to respond to the fact that in the state of New Hampshire right now, Democrats are not in control, right? Republicans are controlling every level, the House, the Senate, the Executive Council, and the governor's office, and are able to push through this really radical right-wing agenda. And I think this right-wing agenda is so even more dramatic because we have so many free staters now that are speaking up and are holding elected office and are having undue influence in our state. But this is what happens. The reality is this is what happens when you put Republicans in charge. They want to make decisions about women's reproductive health care, and I think maybe as your title of the show says, we just need to make sure they understand there's no womb for them in this conversation.
Very good. I like that. Okay, well, there's one more question in the box, or maybe there's another one after this. Yeah. Okay. Mary B says, I was in the audience when the contracts were discussed, and I heard Councilor Gatzis' emotional appeals that 15-year-olds were getting the morning after pill through these contracts, lack of basic contraceptive education, and the differences between the pill and abortion was apparent.
Yeah, he did not even understand that the morning after pill is a contraceptive. Not only that, but at the next meeting, he raised that same point again. This is his stated reason for voting against the contracts, is that 15-year-olds can access Plan B at these providers. And as Commissioner Shibinette said, 15-year-olds can access Plan B at their local pharmacy. And he didn't want to hear that. He really just seems to have a complete lack of understanding of the issue.
Anytime that I've actually heard representatives in the House speak on abortion bills, or even on other bills where they just want to bring up abortion, they really do have a lack of understanding. They really, it's amazing to me that they're adults, and they don't understand any of the details of the issue that they're so vehemently opposing. So the hearings are also, I think to the earlier question about if we could just get them better information. And I really believe that Democrats always feel that that's all we have to do is just get them better information, but that's not what we're facing with the folks that are in control now. They've got the House and the Senate and the Executive Council and the governorship. So they're going to do what they want. they're gonna.
This is a very clear agenda item of theirs, and they are intent on forwarding this this agenda. And the governor, seeking to please the conservative wing of his party, maybe both locally and nationally, is right there, hand in hand with them, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, and on the really, as Congresswoman Kuster said, the assault on women, and this is truly an assault on women.
Oh, there is one more question. Okay. How chronic are they attacking sex education in our schools? Is abstinence, for example, being taught, or religiously motivated ideology interfering with our children's education?
That is not something that has come before the council, so I can't say that I am current on that. Maybe there's one of the other speakers are.
I could maybe provide just a quick perspective on that. That kind of curriculum is determined by. Sorry, didn't mean to jump in super quick, but that kind of curriculum is determined by the school district. So there are various community groups across the state that are empowering students to develop their own curriculum through their own independent research and propose that to their school boards and their administrators. And we've seen some really successful movements around that, particularly in the Conval district. So if you're concerned about whether or not, religious right ideologies are invading your students' education on sex ed, empower your student to go to their administration and demand better education, demand comprehensive sex health education.
Thank you, Leah. Appreciate that. There is one more question, and well, it's a comment actually from the Honorable Wendy Thomas. Not only will doctors leave New Hampshire, but I'm hearing stories from young women who are pledging to leave the state because of this decision. This move is going to make our population older, more white, and more male. And there you might have the justification for why these guys are pushing this. But it's a good point. Well, let's thank Representative Warmington and allow her to go back to her evening. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all that you have to say. It was very, very informative, and we thank you.
Thank you. I hear that my dinner guests have left, so I'm going to stay on for a little while, but I will go on.
Okay, thank you.
I don't usually break in because I'm not a traditional panelist, but I just wanted to mention something to remind people that this was such a terrible legislation that it was never voted on by itself. It was buried into the budget, and something totally unheard of. I don't know how many of us include social policy things in our home budgets, but the governor put out a sort of a disclaimer, said, well, it wasn't my bill. Well, it became his bill and his law when he signed it. So he imposed this on the people of New Hampshire, and there's no way that he can avoid being tarred with that vile. When you embrace a skunk, you can't just say I don't stink. Well,
Roger, I can go you one better, because that House budget, he actually said, what am I going to do? Veto the whole budget? But when we were in charge, he vetoed our budget. And the only change that we made to get to resolution was to allow a trigger for his tax cuts that he wanted, if we had enough money in the kitty at the time that that the trigger was going to happen. And it turned out we didn't have enough money, so we were the responsible ones not having those tax cuts, and he didn't get his tax cuts. But we didn't change anything in the bill, and he vetoed it and held it up for 3 months. So he can veto when he wants to. It wasn't important enough for him to veto. So I think it's time-wise, I'm supposed to keep us on track, which I am not really the right person for that, but because I love to just, but we're going to move on now to Senator Tom Sherman, who's been patiently waiting and listening to the conversation. I'm going to introduce him. I have a little introduction here, so I'll read this for you. Senator Sherman lives in Rye, New Hampshire, and he's serving his second term in Senate District 24. I won't read all the towns for you. He also served 2 terms as a state representative from Rye and Newcastle. Dr. Sherman's lifelong commitment to service started in childhood when he helped his mom provide outreach to people in need via a program she founded called Person to Person. As the New Hampshire State Senate's only physician, Senator Sherman has been a leader in public health in Concord. In fact, I had the privilege to serve on the Emissions Commission that he chaired last year, and our focus was to review climate disruption from the perspective of public health impacts. So that was really was a great commission. Tom serves on the Senate Health and Human Services Committee and also on the Transportation Committee. Dr. Sherman has continued to usher bipartisan legislation critical to patient safety to the governor's desk, and was integral in making New Hampshire the first state in the nation to provide professional oversight for medical technicians, increase available hospital beds for patients in a mental health crisis, and to protect firefighters and community drinking water from harmful PFAS chemicals. So whether it's dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health issues, or the opioid crisis, and now the attack on reproductive freedom here in New Hampshire, Senator Sherman's leadership and expertise are being put to good use. So welcome, Senator, on behalf of the audience.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to thank you all for inviting me. Also, it's an honor to follow Congresswoman Kuster and Cinde, who is doing such amazing work in the Executive Council. The Republicans are lucky that they have 4 people, because if they had 3, she would be the majority. She just is such a force over there. I coined a phrase. I actually kind of made it up, and I think we really have to recognize what's happening in the legislature. And I call it institutional misogyny. I don't think that's an overstep. I think it's really what's happening. Across the board, women's rights are being threatened. And I sat on what's called a committee of conference, where we were trying to get 2 bills through as amendments that were stuck in the House. One was to provide accommodations for women who were lactating, and another one was to provide accommodations for women who were pregnant. And both were stripped off the bill. And then I and the only woman on this committee of conference were both fired, so that they could have and replaced, by the way, with male members, Republicans. And then they were able to vote this out without those 2 accommodations. And I think if you look at this, these are ways that an agenda is being promoted and followed through with without even the full vote or endorsement of the entire legislature. And that's what Roger was talking about. So going directly to the budget, it's not completely unheard of that there would be a policy issue in the budget, but never has there been one that was this dramatic or important. And in fact, we'll all remember that there were actually 3 major policy agendas tucked into this budget. And my belief, and I think this is borne out by the facts, is that this is the only way the governor could get his budget, is by having people like Jeb Bradley and other Republican senators and representatives write these versions of not just the abortion ban, but also education freedom accounts and a version of divisive concepts, which we're seeing play out right now with teachers under the gun. So on the abortion ban, Cinde did a great job of sort of covering this. I'll bring up 4 major parts to this. Fundamentally, there's a 24-week ban on abortion. There is a criminalization of providers who perform abortions after 24 weeks. And there is an ultrasound requirement for every abortion for what's called gestational age. And that's how old is the fetus? How long has the fetus been in development? Finally, the fourth one is really focusing on the pregnant mother and her fetus. So 24-week abortion ban means that, and actually several states have a 24-week abortion ban, but ours is by far one of the most egregious in the country. If we look at the maternal health issue, I like to tell people to think of there being an abortion being an elective termination of pregnancy early in pregnancy. And after 24 weeks in the state of New Hampshire, we have no documented abortions per se, where it's an elective termination of pregnancy. This is what we call in medicine a therapeutic termination of pregnancy. The nuanced difference is really important because in almost every setting, this is a very important, emotional, and difficult decision made between the specialists, which right now in the state of New Hampshire are all at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and the pregnant mother and her family as to what is the best thing to do, not just for her health necessarily, but also for the health of her fetus. And you say, wait a second, how does that work where there's the health of the fetus? One of the parts that is so hypocritical of this is that it actually, in trying to save, to prevent an abortion, it actually puts the life and health of the mother and a fetus at risk. In terms of the fetus, there is a syndrome called twin syndrome where in some cases, it happens rarely. You have twins, identical twins, and one has to be terminated to preserve the life of the other. We have some new therapies that make that extremely rare, but that is something that is real, and this would turn it into a felony. So the mother and the doctor would be forced to have both fetuses die. And that's breathtaking to me. That is just an egregious assault on the medical practice. There are other reasons that are not for a life-threatening emergency for the mother, where she may have to elect to terminate the pregnancy. And one of those is a fatal fetal anomaly, where the fetus is not viable, cannot survive. They know that by the ultrasound that was done. And it actually puts the mother at increased risk. But under this bill, that mother would have to carry that fetus to term. And I can't think of anything more cruel. Well, there is more. It does get more cruel. So I take that back. So the second part of this ban, besides not protecting the life or health of the mother, and potentially actually resulting in an unnecessary death of a fetus, this has attached to it criminal penalties for the provider. And this is chilling. This is where, as Cinde said, Executive Councilor Warmington said, we are already at threat of losing our maternal fetal health program in the state of New Hampshire. This is not only a good program, this is the second highest rated program in the country. The providers as a part of this, it's doctors, nurses, it's a team, are among the very best in the country. And we are at a very high likelihood of losing them. Not only because you're telling them they can't practice medically indicated procedures to save the life or to preserve the life and health of the mother or the fetus, but you're telling them that if they do that and something is off or something like that, or it's determined that they're potentially facing 7 years in prison and a felony conviction. unheard of. It's just, well, it actually does exist in 1 or 2 other states, but it's certainly unheard of in New Hampshire that we criminalize the appropriate practice of medicine. And then when you get to the cruelty of an ultrasound, and this is why on the floor of the Senate, I actually held up a transvaginal ultrasound wand. I wanted the 14 Republican senators to be sure they understood what they were doing. When I'm a gastroenterologist, so when I do a colonoscopy, I have to get informed consent beforehand. And I'll sit down with the patient, explain the procedure and explain the risks and benefits. So with these pseudo doctors that are the Republicans in the Senate who were going to tell women that they had to have procedures, whether or not they were medically indicated, I wanted to be sure that they saw the wand and that they understood what they were forcing on women. Up in the Lebanon area, there's a group of Republicans who are saying, well, you really don't have to do a transvaginal ultrasound. So let me just briefly walk you through this. Because of the position of a fetus in the uterus, there are 2 different kinds of ways of looking at the fetus. And you're trying to determine how old is the fetus, how many weeks. One is a transabdominal ultrasound. You might have had that because your doctor was looking for gallstones or kidney stones. That's not particularly invasive. It's not particularly comfortable, but it's not particularly invasive. And it just uses some lubricant on the wall of the abdomen. In women, typically under 14 weeks of pregnancy, so very early in the pregnancy, very rarely they need to have an ultrasound, either for gestational age or to actually look at the developing fetus to make sure that everything is okay and that there's no major anomaly. That ultrasound is called transvaginal. It's done by taking this probe that is at least 10 inches long and inserting at least part of it up to what's called the crux of the vagina, which is well up into the vagina, right next to the os, which is the opening into the uterus. And it's parked there right as close as they can get to the developing fetus so that they can get the best look they can. Let me be absolutely clear. If you are saying that a woman under 14 weeks has to have an ultrasound for every intended abortion, there is virtually, I can't give you the exact percentage, but the vast majority of those are completely unnecessary from a medical standpoint. In other words, before this bill goes into effect, the vast majority of women don't need them. They aren't indicated. And in fact, in this modern world of telemedicine, you can actually do a telemedicine visit with a young pregnant woman who knows when her last period was, understands, and you can understand what her predicted gestational age is, and you can prescribe via telemedicine the appropriate medicine to have a pharmaceutical abortion. They never had to be seen in the office. They never had to have an ultrasound. But imagine you have a young woman who is a victim of rape or sexual molestation, but typically rape. And can you imagine the legislature telling that woman that for her to have an abortion early in the pregnancy, she's going to have a probe inserted into the vagina? I can't think of anything more egregious, cruel. There's almost no words to describe it. But that's what they've done. And that's exactly what they've done. No exceptions. So besides the cost factor that Executive Councilor Warmington spoke of, that's the scenario that's happening. It's a chilling law that is going into effect January 1st. And there is no justification for it. There is no justification for these ultrasounds. and it is, in my book, cruel. I just add that it strikes me the hypocrisy that is behind this bill. They may, by trying to prevent abortions, actually increase mortality. And I find that just incredibly disturbing. So
Senator, let me read you some questions and see if we can. It's amazing what what you just went over. I mean, I was aware of all of these details, but I think the thing that is gobsmacking me is the idea that they feel qualified to determine medical procedures when they're not qualified to do so. To have the government in your womb, is amazing overreach as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, we've got a couple from an anonymous attendee. It's again about the ultrasound. Why are the abortion providers against an ultrasound requirement in the Fetal Life Protection Act when the providers need to conduct an ultrasound to find an appropriate abortion procedure? I think you might have answered that already, but
yeah, I can answer that quickly. There is early in pregnancy, these are typically prescription, they're pharmaceutical abortions. There isn't a question about what is an appropriate abortion procedure. A vast majority of abortions performed in the state of New Hampshire are very early in pregnancy, so this captures most of them. So in fact, the statute says that the only reason for the ultrasound is for gestational age.
okay. And then a follow-on from the same person for the senator. What is the current percentage of late-term abortions in the state that are performed after 24 weeks? I think you might have mentioned that too, but
it's in terms of late-term elective abortions, it's virtually zero. In fact, if you go back to the testimony that accompanied the bill when it was actually heard in the Senate, you can capture that by going back to the hearing report. They had OBGYNs from across the state, abortion providers from across the state, and there are no documented late-term elective abortions in the state of New Hampshire.
well, the distinction that you made when you were speaking between elective and unwanted terminations, my understanding is that if there is a late-term abortion, it's that horrible kind, right? Where you've got the nursery already and it's a wanted pregnancy, but you still have to have this procedure because of, fetal viability or whatever the issue is. And that's where this law is going to intervene and say that it's illegal, right? So
correct. In fact, the exceptions are really narrow. So they don't protect the fetus, as I described. They don't broadly protect the life of the mother or the health of the mother, and they actually prevent therapeutic terminations of pregnancy that may actually be protective of the life or health of the mother. That's a really tough clinical judgment. It's something that is done with a lot of thought between the mom, the family, and the specialist, the team of specialists. And so what the state has said is, I don't care. You don't have that decision-making capacity, and you have to carry that fetus to term no matter what.
Anonymous attendee again says, during cases where the mom has her life in danger, is it possible to perform an emergency C-section to remove the fetus and perform treatment on both the mom and the fetus?
I can tell you that does happen, because if the fetus is viable, rather than terminating the pregnancy, because these are moms and families that really want this pregnancy, they've carried them this far. So I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm not an OBGYN. These specialists do that kind of intervention as that's what they do. That's what they're trained to do. They do everything they possibly can to save a viable fetus.
Okay, and Althea Ansa says, why not use an abdominal ultrasound to see if the baby is healthy? Who is to say that the doctor must use transvaginal ultrasounds when there are other ways to see if a baby is healthy?
It's not about the baby's health. The transvaginal ultrasound or the transabdominal ultrasound are for gestational age. That's what the statute says. For gestational age, the only reliable and accurate determination below 14 weeks is going to be a transvaginal ultrasound. Suppose you said to me, well, the state says everybody has to have a colonoscopy. It's an invasive procedure. And they're not going to do that. But suppose they said everybody has to have the test that will find polyps with the highest accuracy. That's a colonoscopy, not a barium minima, which is less invasive. This is the same thing. You're not going to find providers where the state is saying you have to do this for gestational age and then expect a provider to use a less accurate mechanism. It's just not accurate at a certain gestational age. So providers can't do that. They bear that liability.
It seems like what you're pointing out is that the doctors are actually trained to make the decision about what's the right thing to do for the patient.
Yes.
There's one more question in here, Senator Sherman, and it's from Marie Morgan, and it says, doesn't the New Hampshire Constitution, Part 2, Article 18A, prohibit changes to statutes in the state budget bills? If so, isn't this section unconstitutional?
That is not the feeling of the senators who did this. It is not the feeling of the current Attorney General, because this was allowed to happen. So it would be great if somebody wanted to challenge it on its constitutionality. But by the way, there is precedent for putting policy in the budget. And so this is not a completely new way to do this. What's remarkable about it is that this is policy. These three pieces of policy are dramatic. And normally, if we tried to do this on the Democratic side, we would hear a hue and cry from the Republicans that this is not the New Hampshire way. The point is, this is not the New Hampshire way. This doesn't allow the people of New Hampshire to have their full say in this. The vast majority of this was actually done in a committee of conference on the budget.
Can you say a little bit about the bill itself? I mean, when it was heard in the Senate, was there testimony? Was there any public input on the Senate side?
There was, but it was then tabled when it came to the floor of the Senate, and then it was put in the budget.
Yeah, because I know some of the other policy pieces were controversial and had a lot of public outcry. For the woman earlier who said, I wish I had known, I would have said something. There were a lot of people who did step up, but it didn't make any difference because they have all the levers of power, so they pushed it through anyway.
Right, and also remember that rather than this being a standalone bill that you could come and testify against in the room, what had happened was that this was tacked onto the budget. So the public really didn't have much of an opportunity, if any, to come and object to this being done. If you know this, Kat, because the way it works is that you have a committee of conference, and then if what comes out of the committee is unanimously agreed to, which it was because they removed people who didn't agree with it, then that goes to the chambers, the House and the Senate, and there's no further hearings on it. Even a committee of conference is not a hearing. So essentially, these components of the budget never had a hearing as a part of the budget. Well,
there's a few more questions popping in here if you'll entertain them. The first one is, does transvaginal ultrasound entail a risk of miscarriage?
No, not really. the risk is significant. And I say this as a man, and I don't pretend to know what it's like to have one of these, but from virtually every woman I've talked to who has, and many women have had these, it's an invasive and extremely uncomfortable, or it can be extremely uncomfortable examination. A woman is placed in what's called the lithotomy position, which is where her legs are up in stirrups for this procedure. She's typically draped, but there's no male equivalent to this. And that's why I held up the ultrasound wand, because I wanted, especially the men voting for this, to understand what they were doing and that they were forcing this on women, whether they're wives, their children, women across the state of New Hampshire. And it's not a benign procedure.
We have a question from Jeff Dickler from Ringe Democrats. He says, hasn't there been a hue and cry from the Democrats about these policies in the budget? If not, why not? And if so, why haven't we heard about it?
There's been a massive hue and cry. I mean, there has been, if you haven't heard about it, that's concerning to me, because virtually every group, whether it's Planned Parenthood, Amplify New Hampshire, all of these are trying to make sure everybody's aware of what happened here. And that's also what an evening like tonight is all about, is making sure that we understand, that everyone understands just how far the Republicans have gone with this kind of legislation, just how un-New Hampshire this is. This is not the New Hampshire way. So yes, there has been a huge amount of information put out about this, both from the House and the Senate, from other groups, and Cinde Warmington has done a phenomenal job, especially as this many of these pieces of legislation have made their way as statute to her, to really make sure everybody's aware of how important these are.
And the last question is from Susan Fanberg, and she said, how are people, as what happened to you, removed from the committee so that only Republicans or others who are like-minded can vote? That's been happening a lot, actually, people being tossed off committees. We got a new Democrat in the House in Dr. Bill Marsh, because he stood up against the anti-mask and anti-vax policies, and they threw him off his committee role. So he ended up switching parties, which is pretty unusual.
And you know, I think they can do that. The chair of the committee, the only way a committee of conference can come out with a finding is if it's unanimous. So the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House can remove members of the committee. They're the ones who appoint us to the committee. They can remove us if they want a unanimous vote. They can just remove us and replace us. And that's what happened with the pregnancy accommodations. I also want to go back to the last question very briefly. They said, how could this happen? This happens because we don't have a majority. This happens because whenever there's a vote, it's 14-10. The Republicans in the Senate are going to win that vote. When it's in the House, if it's the budget and the budget passes, it's going to be the same thing in the chamber where Kat is, where Representative McGhee is. The majority votes, the majority passes it. We can, we had some amazing floor speeches, especially from Senator Rebecca Perkins Quokka, who was 9 months pregnant or 8 months pregnant at the time. We have this, we can speak up, and we did. We had many speakers against this happening, but when it comes down to the vote, there are only 10 of us and 14 of them.
Another thing that's interesting that happened in this last session is because of COVID, we had an emergency order, as did many of our towns, so that we could go remote, right? We could do remote meetings, we could do Zoom, and we were conducting our meetings in Zoom, whereas a lot of the Republicans wanted to go to the legislative office building on the House side and be in the room for the meeting. Many of my caucus, all of us actually, we were online and we had our testimony online. So people were able to observe and then watch the hearings on YouTube after the fact. That level of transparency was not really, they were not as comfortable with it as we would be. We would love to open it up and have the public be able to see what we're doing. But all of that has changed recently. When the executive order was lifted, the position that came back was, well, we can't have hearings like this anymore. So if people want to hear what's happening, they now have to come and be in the room, which very few people are willing to do. So they're back to this cloak of secrecy. And I think that's where the bad behavior may come from. There is also a question here from the Honorable Wendy Thomas. Can you clarify, if a baby dies in utero, would a surgical option to remove the deceased fetus be considered illegal under this ruling?
You know, I can't absolutely clarify that, Wendy, but I will get you an answer. My understanding is that it would not qualify as a termination of pregnancy, but because the pregnancy is already ended.
That makes sense.
There's no fetal heartbeat at that point. But let me get that answered for you, and I'll get it back to you and also to the Hillsborough Dems.
Thank you so much, Senator Sherman. This was wonderful. And it's great that both you and Executive Councilor Warmington had very different, hot takes on what you had to bring us from the experience that you've been having with this, the attacks on reproductive freedom coming from Concord. So now we're going to move on. We're very lucky to have with us Leah Cohen. And Leah is a board member and the outreach director for Reproductive Freedom Fund of New Hampshire. She also has worked with Granite State Progress in all the important work that they do. She's both been a press secretary and media and digital engagement coordinator there. In the 2020 election cycle, Leah served as a field organizer for Organize New Hampshire, AKA the coordinated campaign. And so, Leah came on a little earlier in the program because she's the girl who understands what's going on with the funding. And I just wanted to ask, I understand that Reproductive Freedom Fund was just started in 2019. So can you tell us the mission of the organization and really how it came into being? You stop there.
Yes, and that is correct. The Repro Fund was founded in 2019 and we officially launched this past year in February. And to date, we have funded over 150 individual abortions totaling at $50,000. And we are just getting started, but we're very proud of the work that we have done to serve patients across the state of New Hampshire in accessing abortion care. The Reproductive Freedom Fund is committed to funding patients all across the state and ensuring that no one is unable to access abortion care due to lack of financial resources. Something that very few people know is how expensive abortions are. An average abortion in clinic in the first trimester alone costs $550. And the cost only rises as pregnancies go later in term. And additionally, if you pay for patients on Medicaid or on certain employer provided insurance plans or also on Blue Cross Blue Shield, abortion services are not covered due to the Hyde Amendment. So most patients are paying fully out of pocket. If you have a really high deductible and you are insured, you're still paying mostly out of pocket. This is some of the most expensive medical care in the state, in the country. And it's really hard to access, not to mention the fact that we only have 4 abortion clinics in the state of New Hampshire, 2 offices for Planned Parenthood and 2 independent providers at the Joan G. Lovering Center in Greenland and the Equality Health Center in Concord. So we also see patients having to travel out of state often for abortion care just because they can't get an appointment. And our independent providers and Planned Parenthood work so hard to meet the needs of patients, but there's only so much they can do if patients don't have the financial resources or don't have the time to travel out of state. So we're very committed to doing everything we possibly can to increase accessibility for abortion care for patients and provide any other resources we can. We are an entirely grassroots funded organization, so we rely on the support of our community. We bill ourselves as a mutual aid fund because in addition to supporting patients through direct financial contributions, we also foster a community of pro-abortion, pro-choice activists across the state of New Hampshire, folks who have received abortion care in their lifetimes, which is about 1 in 3 people with uteruses, according to the Guttmacher Institute. And we also engage in public advocacy and public education on abortion care, and sort of myth bust a lot about the realities of abortions and reproductive health care here in New Hampshire and beyond. So we are not just funding abortions and cutting blank checks, but we're also fostering community and engaging in reproductive rights advocacy and education and fighting towards a future in which there are no restrictions on abortion care, because there are no restrictions on most forms of health care in our lives. So why should there be restrictions on abortion care? We are fighting for reproductive liberation. We believe that abortion should be accessible, affordable, on demand, with no questions. And we are unabashedly pro-abortion, pro-patient, and pro-accessibility. We are also working to foster more conversations about the ways in which we talk about abortion, from gender inclusivity to talking about access and not just legality. We like to say that Roe versus Wade is the floor, not the ceiling, because there are lots of things that Roe doesn't cover, including the expensiveness of abortion care and the lack of access to abortion care, and as well as other barriers to care, such as protesters and violent threats and domestic abuse, and lots of different ways in which patients are deterred from accessing critical health care. So we also want to, constantly be raising the question and awareness of the fact that we can talk about abortion differently. We can talk about abortion in an affirmative and inclusive and accepting way, as opposed to just talking about the dangers of Roe going under, as we expect it to in the coming year. We want to move forward. We want to move beyond Roe and move towards a future in this country and in this state in which abortion is normal, accessible, and easily accessible for that matter. So my big elevator pitch to you all is that we really rely on the grassroots support of our community, and we would be so grateful and overjoyed if you would join us as a monthly donor. We have different incentives for donations, including signed books by local New Hampshire authors. You can purchase some of our merchandise. It's very fashionable and cool. And you can also know that you are supporting liberation for women and people with uteruses across the state of New Hampshire, and supporting people's right to access critical health services and health care. If you go to bit.ly/RFFNH, all capitals, you can find our donation page, and we'd be so overjoyed and grateful for you to join us as a monthly donor to keep abortion accessible. As Councilor Warmington mentioned earlier, we are seeing the demand increase since the state denied our abortion clinics state funding. We are seeing that the sliding scale is increasing, that patients are in more urgent need of funds, and that need is only going to rise as the dollars dry up and as we wait for the federal government to restore Title X funding. So we need your help now more than ever to keep abortion accessible here in New Hampshire. As I've said, we've funded $50,000 in abortion care, 150 patients, and we are not stopping anytime soon. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Leah, I'll take a look in the box in a second. I just had a thought while you were talking, and it's interesting because we have the current majority that we have in the House. I'll speak of them because that's what I'm the most familiar with. They're big on liberty for themselves. They're constantly pushing bills that you are not the boss of me, but Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land. And yet this aggressive attack is coming, basically trying to intimidate people out of working in the field, providing the healthcare, and people from seeking abortions, which is it's a regression. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it really does seem like there's more of a push right now, a bandwagon, if you will, that people are jumping on. So how has it affected your work and your organization's work in terms of the intimidation? I mean, do you see it?
Absolutely. I speak to patients directly a lot, as in addition to managing outreach, I also manage our hotline. We see patients who are very nervous and apprehensive about receiving in-clinic care due to protesters. We see patients who struggle to find information about how to access care because of all of the sort of bubbling to the surface that anti-abortion folks have been, crowding the internet with propaganda about abortion. And we also see that members of our fund are increasingly under attack. We're part of a national network of abortion funds who released some guidance earlier this year about protecting ourselves digitally. I can speak personally. I have been threatened for my work for the Repro Fund by neo-Nazis, by members of the National Socialist Club, who have also threatened various members of the New Hampshire legislature, including Manny Espitia and others. It is an increasingly dangerous time to work in the reproductive healthcare space, to work on feminist issues, to be a Jewish feminist prominent woman in this space. But I cannot back down. I don't have a choice to, because providing critical healthcare to patients is the most important work I could possibly be doing at this time in my life. So yes, the threat is real. It is being fomented by members of the legislature, including Don Johnson and James Spillane and Ken Weiler, and various other anti-Semitic figures in the State House. It is being encouraged by prominent leaders in the Republican Party and tacitly endorsed by Governor Sununu's unwillingness to speak out against these issues. But we continue on because we have no choice but to provide this healthcare and to provide this support to patients in need.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because I do understand when we were in the green room before we started, I brought up my little analogy that I make to Executive Councilor Warmington, that we're firefighters, right? We're the people who are willing to run into the thing that needs to be fixed. And it's I think it's just interesting, though, to me that that the moniker of freedom and liberty is constantly being regaled as a reason for many of the bills that we see going through the House and Senate. And yet someone else's freedom is free game. And so it's just, it's not the New Hampshire way, as Senator Sherman said. It's not what I think of when I think of the independence of New Hampshire and the way that we've always operated. We do have several questions, so if you don't mind, I'll switch over and I'll read them to you. The first one is, if it's illegal to have an abortion, then is it Republican stance that birth control, which stops development of a baby, is it going to be illegal for condoms, birth control pills, etc., will be illegal as well, since they stop a baby from forming?
I mean, I can jump in, and I see that Senator Sherman also has something to say, so I'll be brief, but that is the ultimate goal of these projects, to deconstruct reproductive rights and abortion access in this country. The Supreme Court, and in particular Justices Scalia and Justice Clarence Thomas, have been looking for ways to overturn Griswold v. Connecticut, which is the Supreme Court decision enabling women to access birth control without the express permission of their husbands. They have been looking for ways to overturn Lawrence v. Texas, which is the Supreme Court decision that decriminalized sodomy. This is all part of a broader project by the far right to basically enshrine evangelical Christian hegemony in this country. So when we see these threats on our bodily autonomy, this is not just about abortion. This is about freedom and liberty and individual rights across the board for anyone who is not a older cisgender white male, to be frank.
And all I wanted to jump in and say was that all of the mechanisms of contraception that were mentioned in there actually are prior to fertilization. So in fact, my predecessor, Senator Innes, who was a Republican, was one of the sponsors of the bill that opened up the capacity for women to access contraception much more readily. So it is a target for more of the reasons that Leah says than that it has anything to do with abortion. But contraception is not abortion. Abortion is after fertilization, and the contraception is all pre-fertilization. So just to make sure that's clear. I also wanted to just say really quickly, Kat, I did go in and verify that the bill, the statute, does not prevent the removal of a fetus that has died. So it does not impact that.
Thank you for the clarification. That's super. There's a couple more questions here, and we're just about there at time. Is abortion thought of differently in different countries? Kathy Washburn asks.
Yes, in most European countries, the abortion pill, which is how most patients receive abortion care in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, is legal and accessible over the counter. In fact, there are organizations dedicated to ensuring that patients across this country can access abortion care via the pill, and they are shipped from the EU, where it is legal and much more readily accessible. So yes, this is one of the very few, modern countries, to use a broad term, that has so many devastating restrictions on abortion care, particularly in the first trimester.
And I think we've been losing our status. I've noted that honestly, the folks who do the kind of weighing of, is it a democracy that you live in and all that sort of thing, all of our rankings have been going down because of attacks on the press and attacks on women and attacks on personal rights, and also the hegemony that you talked about with the religious right trying to make us more more of a fundamentalist attitude to what kind of society they'd like to see us adopt. So, the pluralistic model seems to be under attack a bit. So we have one last question. I have a strong interest in myth busting, and I would very much like to learn more about that aspect of what you do and how I could get involved in that area.
We would love to have you join our grassroots team of volunteers who are dedicated to community education through various means. We host organizational meetups, we do art builds, we create virtual magazines that are known as zines. We do lots of social media creation and lots of community education, and we're hoping to even expand our capacity to do that more in the coming year as we increase our funds size and our volunteer team size. So if you'd like to join our grassroots team of volunteers, I encourage you to go to our website. It's just reprofundnh.com or .org, both redirect there, and fill out our Get Involved form. We'd love to have you join us in the work of busting myths about abortion care. Even just now, today, we were able to sort of bring to light another thing that gets lost a lot in the conversation about abortion care, is that in Europe, these are highly unregulated and they are just simple pills. And abortion in most cases is 5 easy pills. So there's a lot to be discussed here and a lot to demystify about abortion care. And demystifying abortion is also how we make headway in keeping abortion legal and accessible.
And safe. Thank you so much, Leah. Really, really appreciated all you had to say. And I hope everyone who joined us here this evening has enjoyed it as well. I'm going to hand it back to Roger now to send us off.
Well, thank you to everybody, all our panelists, our wonderful host. And I want to make sure to thank our Communications Committee Chair, Katie Cutchell, and also Bev Cotton, who have done some invaluable work in getting this and all of our forums organized, produced, and broadcast. And then thank you all for joining us for this forum. And also please share the recording with your friends and families so that information it contains may reach the widest possible audience. We learned tonight that there's some people who just weren't aware that some of these things were going on. Informed voters are our best weapon in the fight to defend democracy. In closing, I have to say, sometimes I feel like I have to apologize for being an old white guy. But you know what? My redeeming factor is I'm an old white Democrat guy. And there's a bunch of us who are walking in step with our sisters. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We don't have anything in the pipeline for new forums for the rest of this year unless something pops up. And please, we all welcome your comments. If there's anything any issue that you think we need to address that we aren't, by all means, let us know. And also get involved with your local committees. And if you don't know how to get hold of them, get hold of us through our website, and we will put you in touch, because we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us, and it's going to take all of us to do our bit. Okay, thank you all, and good night.